Now, smartphones. We can't live without them now. Or can we? More and more parents want to ban their use in primary and secondary schools. The Parent Pact, organised by a campaign group, Smartphone Free Childhood, has now been signed by more than 6,500 parents, covering about a fifth of schools across the UK. Is a ban the right way to go, though? Our reporter Ellie Cleverly has been to one school in Hampshire which is trying it out.
If the majority of free time is spent on a screen, that means a child isn't moving, they're not exercising, they're not outside playing, exploring, they're not talking to people in real life, they're not looking at faces, they're not practicing words. So there's lots of things that they're not doing if they're just sat at home on their screen.
To reduce screen time, parents across the UK are joining forces by signing the Parent Pact, an initiative launched by Smartphone Free Childhood, a campaign group co-founded by Hampshire mum Claire Ferniehuff.
Parents come together and sign to say that they're going to delay giving smartphones to their children until the end of year 9. And we've got that signed for about 58,000 children now in about 8,500 schools. We believe that all schools need to be smartphone free. At the moment, only around 11% have an effective policy, which means that that's the case.
Last month, St Swithin's in Winchester banned mobile phones for all students until year 11.
We'd been thinking for a while about what we were going to do about mobile phones. I'd been worried that perhaps the girls were spending too much time on their phones. And although they hadn't had them in the mornings, they'd got them back after lunch, and we could see that they were picking up a stream of messages, and that was sort of taking them out of the normal course of the day, and then they would be heads down and not talking to each other, which made me think, really, we must act now before their brains are completely rewired.
Students will put their phones in one of these pouches at the start of the school day. It's locked with a magnetic strip. Then they come to one of these lock stations, which open at the end of the day to unlock it and get their phones back out.
It feels as though the girls aren't really thinking about them as much as they used to, and I definitely feel as though, heads are up, people are interacting, it's a more sociable school.
The thing with phones, it's like a distraction that can sometimes take you out of the moment, as well as especially with GCSEs coming up, it makes me more focused on revising.
What do your parents think about it?
They think it's a really good system because when I'm on my phone at home, I get really distracted. I don't answer many questions, and they think that might happen at school if I was on my phone.
Maybe instead of being on my phone, I should go do more sport, go socialise with my friends a bit more. But I do think it's still really important to have downtime to yourself and still be able to use social media or contact your parents.
And not all children have a smartphone.
A significant proportion of our Year 7 students have arrived without a smartphone, whereas if we wind the clock back a year, the vast majority arrived with a smartphone.
I don't actually have a phone at the moment, no. As having it on you all the time just means that you're less social. And especially in registration, when everyone else had their phones before last year, I've noticed that as soon as they got them, they just stopped talking, whereas now we start chatting.
We hope alongside the introduction of the pouches is that we can work with them in a proactive way to help them, just develop good habits rather than trying to break embedded bad habits, which is what I think we were worried was happening initially.
There are plenty of other ways schools are trying to keep phone use to a minimum, including leaving phones at reception or keeping them in lockers. Ofcom say that 89% of 12-year-olds own a smartphone. But is it doing the children any damage?
These aren't actually phones, they're supercomputers. And they're adult devices as well. They're not designed for children. And that's why, at the moment, they're very unregulated. We need to take a pause and we need to step back and say, hang on, is this actually what we want?
What we do know, as far as the research tells us so far, is that children aren't going to do better educationally if they go to a school where there's a mobile phone ban. What we don't know is whether these children are feeling safer, happier, less under pressure. But the research is telling us it's home life. Parents have an immensely important job in helping to guide their child through screen time. Teachers can add on to that a little bit, but they certainly can't change screen behaviours. This has to be parents who are doing that from day one when their child gets access to screens.
At the beginning of this year, the previous government released new guidance on phones in schools, suggesting that the use of the devices should be prohibited. However, it's ultimately the head teacher's decision if they want to ban mobile phones in their school.
We need much more government support to make that essentially mandatory. And we also need funding for schools to be able to implement that, because it's not always going to be cost neutral to do that. Heads need government support. They can't do this on their own. This is too big an issue, and we need the government to get behind this immediately.
You need everyone on the same page, basically, Jess, and that is the role of government, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the segment was really interesting because it's a really live debate, this, at the moment. I've met a number of teachers and parents in my constituency who've raised the issues about not just smartphones in schools, but smartphones at all for children under a certain age. And I think we really need to dig into what the mental health impacts are versus what the social potential benefits are of young people being able to connect with colleagues, because technology is now an inevitability in our lives in some way.
The Department for Education under the last government were getting close to this, weren't they? And saying, well, let's just slow down with this, or, you know, at least in school time, it would be quite straightforward. Would it be empowering to the teachers to say that's now the law?
Yes, and you know, if a number of teachers do say that, and I'm sure the Department of Education is consulting on this, one thing we are looking at is through the Online Safety Act or bill, you know, what we can do to protect young people from you know, violent content or misogynistic content or things that might affect their mental health in a negative way. But at the moment, this is a sort of wide issue that I'm actually looking forward to discussing with teachers and parents in the constituency. Yeah,
it's interesting you bring it in the wider context of the online bill and AI as well. You know, these are things in the world that we have to learn to deal with. I guess we've got to teach children how to use these well.
We do, yeah, and Conservative government started that with their guidance that obviously was published in February, and 10 million that was put with behavioural hubs into schools. And I think it is, you know, we heard with that clip there that it is wider than the ban. The ban helps with reducing distraction, helping with bullying, but limited within that school period. And it's much wider than that. You know, the psychology behind it and the impact on our children's mental health and well-being goes beyond that. And how can we enable and empower parents to help that within the parental home? I'm a parent myself, although my children now are in their 20s. This necessarily wasn't an issue at school. My background is 25 years in further education. And technology and AI, we need much debate around it. It is enhancing learning. It is the new jobs of the future. So how can we safely bring that into the learning environment when all children should have the opportunity to learn and be safe? And I think that's at the heart of this debate.
Yes, I suppose there's a levelling element to this as well. I mean, I'm saying everybody has to be on the same page, but some children will have access to faster smartphones, presumably, than others, or or should it be part of lessons? What do you think?
And part of the technology in schools point is that a number of schools now use apps for kids to do their homework, submit coursework, things like that, and that is a completely separate issue, is that digital divide and access to the technology, which I don't think we've totally cracked either yet.
Is it making people feel more pressured that they've got that phone in their pocket? I mean, there's talk about cyberbullying, isn't there?
I feel pressured with the phone in my pocket.
We all
and the
do.
sort of sheer volume of communication you get. So I completely understand it from that element of peer pressure, social pressure, to stay connected all the time. It is a really different pressure than we faced when we were younger, or even when your kids
We used to talk about children will get square eyes because they watch too much television. That's gone away now, hasn't it? I mean, the new technology always moves things on.
Yeah, and I think, it is... parents, our own mental health you alluded to there, have we enabled and empowered teachers? So how can we give the teachers the toolkit and the mechanisms themselves that they can demonstrate that and have that wider debate within lessons about wider society, and actually understanding the quickness of the evolving of technology and big tech firms and AI, for example.
Right.